p.m. Welcome, everybody. Thank everybody for showing up today. Hope everybody had a good 4th of July weekend and week. Our agenda is published. Call to order being item number 1. Item number 2 is public comment. Anyone here want to make a public comment? I don't see any. No public comments. All right. Item number 3 is first reading of an ordinance to amend Section 30.35F of the Mount Pleasant Code of Ordinances to add 30.35H in order to allow council participation in voting by electronic means. If you'll take a look at that, we gave it serious consideration. This does come from the Police, Legal, and Judicial Committee, and we looked at all aspects of this. This is not an emergency ordinance. It mentions the states of emergency in which these things can exist, but basically this is if you were sick or you were quarantined or something, you would not have to miss a council meeting, and this is an individual thing. This is not a sweeping thing about all the council meetings being by video. Let me turn it over to our attorney to maybe just walk us through a few aspects of it. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Mayor. As you said, this is a standard ordinance. This is a standard ordinance, not an emergency ordinance, and therefore the standard voting rules would apply. This was requested in lieu of, so there's some context in history. In March, council voted to remove existing procedure in order to have meetings where you could participate electronically, and that was done by emergency ordinance. State law does allow, under FOIA, participation and voting by electronic means. There's no restriction. The only restriction is our ordinance, which is 30.35. And if you look at the first page, Section F says manner of voting. You will also note that we've done a strike through on the language that says town council will allow absent members to listen by telephone, but will not allow participation and voting by telephone. That is how the ordinance has been, how it stood for probably 40 years or so. And our ordinance would prohibit, under these circumstances, participation. Now, none of this, if this ordinance is passed, council and the mayor still have the authority to pass an emergency ordinance allowing suspension of the rules. And we've written that in the new section, which is on the next page, under number 4, the very last provision, which would essentially allow all of council to have those meetings as you did for a period of perhaps 2 months. This provision is very specific as it came out of police, legal, and judicial, and all of the members participated and had, it was an excellent discussion, and we were asked to prepare this in a very specific manner, meaning if you look at section 1, it talks about emergency circumstances, and it is limited essentially to illness which prevents the member from attending or could endanger other members of staff or members of the public, an emergency involving injury or illness to an immediate family member, or if there's a declared state of emergency by the town or the state, which would essentially prevent a meeting, and it is only those circumstances. So then the next question is, what is the mechanism? Let's assume there's a meeting Tuesday night, and one of these circumstances arises where one council member thought they may be exposed, which is what we're dealing with right now. The procedure would be to notify, and at that meeting, the mayor would have the authority to determine whether that excuse falls under these very limited circumstances. The mayor would decide, and as is true for all decisions of the chair, that decision is appealable to the members of council physically present. A quorum of, that was an issue that we worked through the other day, Mayor, as you recollect. Those members actually here would be able to change that, appeal that by a majority vote. So those are the circumstances in a nutshell. I'm glad to answer any questions you may have.
Couple of technicalities. Does this apply to committees as well?
It does, Mayor, and that's a good point. It does, and mainly because the ordinance as previously written also applied to committees, and I believe committee on Tuesday felt that it was appropriate to address this for committee, so the chair of whatever committee meeting would have that authority as well.
And what about boards and commissions?
No, sir, boards and commissions, as you all know, are not prohibited by our prior ordinance. They were allowed to do that, and many of our boards and commissions decided not to meet or push those out to when it was appropriate to meet in person. But again, there's no prohibition on them doing so in a circumstance if they
Okay.
wish. I think that might be more of a, I can't say this for certain, but you all have town-issued iPads and the like. There may be some technical issues with them, so they may not meet the standard of this
Okay.
ordinance unless there is a technical ability technical ability to participate.
And would you explain how we arrived at video and the connectivity stipulation, please?
Yes, sir. I think the concern among committee members, rightfully so, was, well, what type of participation should we allow? And under number 3, part 3 of section H, it says electronic means shall be limited to real-time audio and video connection at the meeting. That specific provision, there was a concern about, say watching it via YouTube, which where our meetings are broadcast, and then calling in by phone. There's not a real-time connection. And so you'd have the problem of comments and the like on, is it 8-second delay or some delay of that point. So we have a real-time audio and video requirement, so not just by telephone. And should connectivity be lost at any time, the remote participating member shall be ineligible for further participation or voting related to the agenda item or items being addressed at the time of the interruption. So if you're on a particular issue and that connection is lost, they'd be ineligible, but of course they could gain that connection back and continue participation in the meeting. So I believe that was the concern that committee had.
One of the things that came up in the committee's discussion was if you were on your cell phone and you're driving down I-26 or up I-26, and we come to, let's say, an amendment, and we think you're hearing it, and we think you're ready to vote, but you've lost the signal. If we have video, we know when you go away. If it's only cell phone, we don't. And then when your signal comes back, you go, wait, what did y'all do? And we go, well, we had an amendment and it passed. Well, I didn't get to vote. Well, we called for the vote and you weren't. So this will take any controversy out of that. If we lose your picture, we know that we've lost you.
Right. Yes, sir. And from an overall standard, again, in order for this to happen, there really does need to be a physical quorum present. So this is not intended to, without an emergency ordinance, there still has to be a quorum of members present. So I believe that was one of the concerns that committee had as well.
Right. This did come from committee. It does not need a second. We're in discussion. Are there any questions? This would be first reading, right?
Yes, sir. And to clarify, this is first reading. Second reading would be at a future. This second reading cannot be on Tuesday, final reading, because our ordinance requires 7 days between readings. So it would be at a future special meeting, which I understand, at least the discussion was, there are meetings set or being proposed for
Later in
some
July.
planning items that are arising. So
Right.
that would be an appropriate time.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion to approve and we have a second. Is there any discussion? And of
Yes,
course,
sir.
Yes, sir. All right. And if there are any amendments, that can come at second reading.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Mr. Mayor, I am not in favor of requiring the video. The reason I'm not in favor is, first of all, from an electronic standpoint, you're eliminating an ability for somebody to pick up the issue if they have electronic problems. And I, for one, have had those on several Zoom meetings recently. There are many meetings that I have not necessarily participated on the phone, but was involved in with council members by phone. The easy way to find out if the individual is there when you're ready to vote is to call for a roll call vote. That's a very simple way to resolve the issue where you're not sure whether the person's there. And again, from a standpoint of the emergency for someone, they may not have immediate access to some visual means to participate in the meeting. But a cell phone would most likely be available to them. As an example, if there happened to be a emergency at a restaurant that we all know that did not allow the individual to use his visual means to be a part, but he wants to participate, he could do it by phone. If there happened to be an emergency at a school where a member of our board is a principal, and that emergency did not allow her to use a visual means, but allowed her to use a phone, she could do it. So I am not in favor of only allowing a visual means when, if your big concern is not knowing whether the individual is there, when you take a vote, all you have to do is call for a roll call vote. So I would make a motion to strike the part that requires the video part and still allow for a person to be able, in an emergency, to use a telephone to participate and to vote.
I believe that would have to come at second reading, right?
That's correct, Mayor. Yes, sir, Mr. Chapman.
I heard what he said. I heard
I
what you
understand
said.
your notes and would anticipate, if this goes forward, that motion will be appropriate at second reading.
Is there anything in state law that would preclude that happening using a telephone?
No, sir.
I didn't think so. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question on that because it does bring up a point. We're talking in here, and maybe I've missed something, but it says emergency situation arising, preventing the member from appearing in person, such as declared state of emergency, which prevents the member from appearing in person. Oh, all right. So it doesn't have to be an illness. If we say it's an emergency, we can call people in from wherever. Is that what we're saying? Is that what we're saying?
Right. I mean, I think, yes,
You
ma'am.
gave the example of like the school and things like that, or driving down the road, and I'm sitting here saying, you wouldn't be driving down the road if you're sick at home, so.
We didn't, the committee did include, or at least discuss inclusion, and this is the part, I think, that there was some discussion on, Mayor, if I'm correct. It was about involving a family member and the like, and that language is in there, but that, I think, was where, if I am interpreting correctly, the discussion, and the committee members can certainly weigh in, it was about family members and how far these excused issues extend. And so that one certainly is a little bit, it doesn't apply directly to the well-being of the council member, but to a family situation. I'm not sure if that's your question, and I would certainly welcome the discussion from the committee members.
Thank you very much. It could be that I just didn't quite understand the part about emergency. Like if we have an emergency and we need everybody's input as quickly as possible, that's when we could call it, and you might be anywhere at that point. That's part of the idea, right?
This, let me make sure we're talking about the same thing, because I don't think I'm understanding.
What I'm talking
Yeah.
about is when we have to have, to have the need to come in visually or otherwise, phone, and the example was given of being in the car, being at the school, but yet one of the main things brought up here is illness.
Right.
And I'm saying you wouldn't be at the school or car if you're ill. But the first part, which is in an emergency situation, if there's an emergency situation, this is saying we could come in from wherever we are at any time, even if we're out of town, it sounds like.
I don't believe out of
Okay.
town would, as written, would be, and I think that was one of the specific concerns of the committee, was this would not be based on it. There are really three issues listed. One is illness, one is a state of emergency, which is state or local, and the third being an emergency of a family member. And it's restricted to those three scenarios.
If we have a state, so this is the tricky part. We have a state of emergency. We want as many people's input as possible. We're going to bring them in from wherever they are, whether they're driving in the car, like Mayor Haney's example, or at the school as principal, like Mr. Counselor Chapman's example. Is that what we're saying?
As long as it meets one of these three scenarios, wherever you are, certainly you could participate from, as long as currently written, understanding what potential changes might be voted on in the future, as long as you have those capabilities, the electronic capabilities, then you could participate. So,
Right, so in an emergency, we can
Right.
come in from anywhere.
Yes, ma'am.
Otherwise, or if we're sick. Otherwise, yeah, got it. Okay.
but just to clarify, not if you have plans or are traveling of
Right.
some sort, that would not technically meet the standard.
No, I got that.
Mr. Rambo was first, and then Mr.
I was just going to address Ms. Langley's concern. I think we had a lot of conversation at this at committee, and I think the concern was, there was one, David had given us a few options as far as like how to write one of these. I mean, one of the options would have been, you can allow electronic participation, period. And we felt like we wanted everybody to be here and not, a vacation is an excuse, I just don't feel like coming in.
Right.
I'd rather just call in is not an excuse. And so, but I think we just recognize, given the current situation, that sooner or later, all of us are going to be quarantined at some point or exposed or whatever. And so we really tried to just limit it to kind of those sort of circumstances.
Right, I got it.
But it's hard, though.
I'm good.
Mr. Santos?
Well, I was just going to say, some years back, I had a situation where I was stuck on the tarmac with the airplane for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So I was not able to get back to a council meeting, and certainly I didn't have a computer. So I wasn't able to go on then. And then, you're in a plane, so it's tough to conduct business with people sitting so close all around you. So I agree with Howard on the video one, because there may be places where you just can't use a video or can't have access to a video, but I'm sure there's some other circumstances out there other than being sick or whatever that might hamper somebody's ability to participate in a council meeting. So I'm not sure how you would handle that, because you certainly don't want to conduct a business meeting, a council meeting on an airplane with people packed all around you, crying babies and everything else. So I think we need to look at that real careful and just make sure that we understand that there'll be some situations that'll happen that really we're not going to be able to do it. I think everybody will make a really good attempt to do it. Everybody wants to do it, but I'm just thinking there's some other issues out there that we haven't thought of that may preclude somebody from being able to either call in or be on a video.
Ms. Hyatt?
The point of this is if you physically can't be here because you're sick. So being stuck on the plane is not going to be a reason to call in. You'll have to miss the meeting. So it's only, we're trying to protect each other basically from COVID, or it says endangering others at the meeting. That has to do with if you might be infectious, you need to be quarantined. So it's not being stuck in traffic and wanting to call in, or it's only a very, very limited reason.
And again, this is first reading. We can't have second reading on Tuesday. So the earliest it would be, it could be the August meeting, or it could be at a special meeting later in July if we hold one, if we can get everybody for the comp plan and the building heights, which we were going to try to get at the direction of the committee prior to our August meeting. So we've got time to think about amendments and all to change this. It is a difficult issue. Did you, or yes?
Well, one more quick one, and it might help because we have two examples very recently, if it would be okay to recap them. We had a situation very recently with everybody except, unfortunately, Counselor, right to say, Councilwoman Corley, thought she might have COVID and couldn't be here, but definitely was able to do something from home, not in bed, awful case. And so is that one where because she was sick, she could have been able to do this if we had this in place?
That's what the committee, that's
Right,
That's
As
what
I
the
understand
committee
it,
was
that is the
trying to get
thrust.
at, right.
That is the thrust, the very thrust and purpose
Okay.
of this ordinance. Yes, ma'am.
so then the other scenario was we had an emergency meeting called just barely 24 hours before that had a quorum, but several people were going to be gone because they already had plans, couldn't change the plans at the very last second. Because it was an emergency meeting that had emergency subject, which was the requiring of masks and so forth, could they have come in electronically?
Not unless one of the three criteria are met.
Because I thought emergency was.
I thought it was
one of the-
covered by the
that's why-
state
That's why I asked the
declared
earlier.
state of emergency.
Yeah, it's a state of
Well,
emergency
if
in
it's
the
a-
town and the
Well,
state.
Let's clarify that, because that's a good point. If there is a state of emergency that would prevent it from happening, it would. So, but let's remember, so Mayor, we may have had this conversation, and I want to share it with everyone. The question was asked of me, not in a meeting, can we, as a council, as a group, meet, let's say some sort of issue happens, right? A hurricane, an outbreak of some, whatever the
Riots.
situation is. And it's, so the theory is, we can't all act as a group together, given the current ordinance, right? Can't do that. Well, what would the provision be? And I take the position that if there is an actual emergency situation that would prevent council meeting as a whole, where it was mandated by conditions that there be an emergency meeting by electronic means, we could do that. I mean, I can't imagine there being a situation where we could be challenged under FOIA in that emergency situation. So I'm not sure if that answers the question you're asking, but it's one of those chicken and egg, right? How can you pass as a council emergency ordinances when you can't get together in the first place? And I think that's a very different scenario than what we're talking about in this ordinance.
Right, but that's why I think there's still confusion here. I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse or something, but we have a situation that just happened where it was something that was deemed to be an emergency. We were in a state of emergency according to the state, and we were in a state emergency according to the, I think, either county or city. And something was called that was in very, very short notice. And if we had at least, let's say, 9 or 8 of those voices able to speak, we might have done something that day. But because we didn't, several of us thought, so, and if that had been a Zoom meeting, if it had been called as a Zoom, not Zoom, but Microsoft Meetings meeting, Microsoft Teams, we probably could have had that meeting with all participants.
I would take the position that the way this is written, there would have to be an emergency meeting that would allow us to bypass, first of all, FOIA, and then second of all, any provisions that would prevent electronic. But again, in an emergency situation, that's a fact-by-fact, case-by-case basis as to whether that specific meeting would qualify in emergency circumstances to hold the meeting via electronic means. So there is flexibility. It just depends on the facts and circumstances.
And again, this is first reading. We gave it our best shot at committee on Tuesday. I'm sure there's some things we have not thought about or some aspects that could be added to this. So if everybody will give it some thought. We can't have out-of-session meetings, but, you know, David, like after our committee meeting, you did say, here's some ideas to make it a better ordinance and all that. So maybe get them to David and let it be more of a legal thing than a council discussion.
Sure. That's a good point, Mayor. As we go forward, and assuming you move forward today, all these thoughts are, because there are so many scenarios, all of you can probably think of a dozen or more scenarios that could occur. And when we write ordinances, it's not for right now, it's for the future. It's things that maybe we haven't thought of. And so while it is appropriate to consider the COVID crisis, we also write these for things maybe, hurricanes are prevalent. We have those storm events seemingly every year now. So when I think about writing it, I think about those things as well. And certainly, if you all have situations, I'd like to be able to consider those so that we can include it.
Okay.
And Mayor?
Yes, sir.
That's why I'd like this to be as, I guess, friendly, if you will, to the council, because we all want to be a part of what's happening. That's why we were elected. We shouldn't be, trying to keep people out of doing things. So, and when we come to a vote, that I'd like this to be as all-encompassing and general if we can.
Sure. All right, are we ready
think Ms.
to
Hyatt
vote on
had a
first reading?
Well,
Ms.
I was
Hyatt?
just going to say, with this language, I assume this means a emergency has already been declared. And something.
Right.
I think maybe what
Right.
Ms. Landing was asking was, can we do this to come together to declare an emergency? But this is saying there's already been an emergency.
Right.
To where we can't come in like a hurricane's blowing over our heads.
Right.
But we need to vote on something, so then we can do it.
All right, so two scenarios. You're
Yeah.
correct, ma'am. If an emergency's already been declared
Already
by the
been.
state, and we have Title 41 of our code allows the mayor to do that as well, that could be done. But even in a situation where that hasn't happened and it's not possible to get
Okay.
together, I believe that it would be very difficult to challenge the group getting together via remote in a true emergency situation in order to declare that very emergency
okay.
or act in that emergency situation.
Okay. All right, are we prepared to vote? Again, this is first reading of ordinance 200038. All in favor of the motion to approve the ordinance as first reading, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All
I'm
right,
opposed.
okay, one opposed. All right, so the motion does pass first reading.
Ordinance number 20038.
Thank you very much. Item number 4, discussion of process forward for hiring in-house general counsel. We discussed this at our committee meeting as well. Everybody has been given new applicants what we wanted to do, and remember, we have to discuss the process publicly. We discussed the applicants in executive session, was just make sure that we are prepared to, as we identify qualified applicants before we take any further steps, even just to interview people, let's make sure that council has agreed to do that. And take a look at the new applications. You'll see some with very local ties and local experiences. And that having been said, the rest would have to do with kind of the qualifications of some of those people, and that would be an executive session. So I guess what I'm saying is it would depend on everybody's assessment of the applicant pool about the process going forward, and we can discuss the applicant pool in executive session. Item 5 is executive session. If we go into executive session, it would be to receive legal advice on a contractual matter with regard to the town's contract for legal representation and to review applicants for the general counsel position. Do we have a motion to go into executive session? We have a motion. Do we have a second? And a second? If we do go into executive session, upon reconvening, council may take action on any item, including any subsection of any section listed on an executive session agenda or discussed in an executive session during a properly noticed meeting. All in favor of the motion to go into executive session for the reasons stated, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we are in executive session, and we're going to courtroom. We're going through this door. All right. We are reconvened. Gary's joined us. No action was taken, no votes were cast. Musical chairs. Does the chair hear any motions resulting from executive session? Hearing none, and that being the completion of our agenda, this meeting is adjourned. Everybody have a hot weekend.